Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Europe's Cataclysm 30 Years War by Epic History. That's right, we've got a new Epic History video. It's always exciting when we have a release from them, since they are one of the best history channels on YouTube. Now we'll be covering the 30 Years War, which I think the title describes correctly was truly a cataclysm. It was this immensely devastating catastrophe for Central Europe in particular that would have resounding historical effects for hundreds and hundreds of years to follow. So, a really fascinating conflict. If you guys end up enjoying this one, I would appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. With all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this video.
1618. Europe stands on the cusp of the most destructive war in its history. A 30-year-long cataclysm that will engulf the continent.
Yeah, the 30 Years' War was the most devastating war Europe had faced, and it would be that, in terms of casualties, until World War I, which is about 300 years later. Think of that, the most deadly war Europe saw for the next 300 years, until the 20th century, right? That is how catastrophic this conflict truly was.
Rape, slaughter, and rumors of cannibalism will haunt the land. War, starvation, and plague will decimate whole populations.
Yeah, and I mean, as they pointed out there, what was so devastating about this conflict was that even beyond the fighting itself, everything that the fighting caused is what really did a lot of the damage. So the famine, the pestilence, the disease that came from the warfare itself is what made this really, to a lot of people in Central Europe, feel like the end times. Felt like everything was over. We recently reacted to Extra History series on the 30 Years' War, and they framed the whole series through the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? So just to give you a sense of how people viewed this conflict at the time, just how horrible it was. And I'm sure we'll cover that in great detail through this video, but just to give you an idea up front.
Men, women, children, soldiers and civilians. No one will be spared.
Yeah.
In a conflict that still casts a long shadow across European history to the modern day.
Very true, and the world.
Our video is sponsored by Europa Universal.
Seems like an appropriate sponsor, so I've got their video linked down below, so go check it out, show them support. We want to thank Epic History for making these fantastic videos that we all enjoy.
From the game to reconstruct one of history's most complex and devastating conflicts.
I have seen more corpses than living men, more ruined houses than standing ones, more places desolate than inhabited, right? So clearly an account from the 30 Years' War written afterwards, 1668, but gives you a good idea of what people would see when they were traveling or marching through Central Europe at this time, primarily through the Holy Roman Empire.
100 years after the Protestant Reformation split Christianity into rival camps, Europe is bitterly divided.
Yeah, and the 30 Years' War, it's almost like the sort of capstone or the grand finale of the Reformation and the wars of religion, right? I mean, this is a century afterwards, right? But following the actions of one Martin Luther, the beginning of the Reformation, Europe had gone through a series of these religious wars. There had been some type of agreement reached, but this will be the culmination of a lot of that. And of course, the most devastating war of the time, though, you know, we might also cover in this video, there were absolutely religious motives for this war, but people also got involved, especially as the war continued, for a bunch of more material reasons. You know, you saw unlikely alliances formed between Catholic powers and Protestants, because religion was not always the underlying motivator, but it was definitely a big part of the war, particularly in the early stages.
Many northern rulers have embraced the Protestant teachings inspired by Martin Luther. In the south, most remain solidly Catholic and loyal to the Pope in Rome. Suspicion, unrest, and sectarian violence spread like a virus.
And, I mean, you can see within Central Europe, within the Holy Roman Empire, there is quite a mix, right? You see a lot of Protestants, a lot of Catholics, and I'll also point out, on a map like this, it does sort of simplify things a little bit, where you have patches of yellow and patches of blue. But in some cases, that was true, right? Some of these regions, particularly places like Spain, for example, were definitely overwhelmingly Catholic, but particularly in Central Europe, there was a lot of pretty mixed areas, which was another thing that made this war so brutal.
In England and Scotland, Protestant King James fears a Catholic resurgence. In France, Catholic authorities are nervous about Protestant subversion. The Protestant Dutch fight desperately for independence from Catholic Spain. But the divisions run deepest in the Holy Roman Empire.
Yep.
This is not a unified realm, but a patchwork of kingdoms, principalities, and duchies, many of which will one day form the modern state of Germany.
Yeah. And bishoprics, by the way, which is relevant when we talk about all of this religious struggle.
Voltaire later quipped, "It was neither holy, Roman, nor an empire."
Yeah, that's probably the most famous quote associated with the Holy Roman Empire. Whenever it gets brought up, that's what pops into my head, which, is obviously a more critical take, but I would argue it's a fair one as well. The Holy Roman Empire, it does depend on when you look at it in its history. At times, it could be more powerful and a little more unified, but it often was extremely decentralized. There was an extreme mix of these different little states and polities, and that has definitely been the case, particularly following the Reformation, when the Holy Roman Emperor has really been weakened, right? Especially after Augsburg and some of these treaties and pieces that have been made, the religious authority of the Holy Roman Emperor has been weakened, right? I mean, your entire realm isn't even Catholic anymore. It's split, right? So it's really hard to unify this supposed empire, right? So this is a time when a typically divided empire was more divided than it even usually was.
Instead, each mini-state has its own government, but all are overseen by the Holy Roman Emperor. The Emperor is a figurehead, elected by 7 powerful princes and archbishops. For centuries, the role has been filled by a member of the Habsburg dynasty, Europe's dominant ruler of vast lands that include Spain and its overseas colonies.
Yeah, the Habsburgs control a lot of territory, right? We think about the Habsburgs traditionally as associated with Austria and that empire, but as you could see, the Habsburg family controlled territories throughout Europe and beyond, and the Holy Roman Emperor was traditionally a member of the Habsburg family.
The emperors are staunch Catholics, but their Holy Roman Empire is as religiously split as the rest of the continent. Since a treaty of 1555, religious peace has held together under...
And that is Augsburg they're talking about, 1555. And, Voltaire says it's not holy, it's not Roman, it's not an empire, which you could argue was always the case, but especially now, once again, was the empire ever holy? Depends on your opinion. But, for example, if you're a Catholic, and that's sort of one of the big points of the Holy Roman Empire, to have this Catholic empire, which is very closely aligned with the Pope, though, of course, the Emperor and the Pope were not always aligned. There was a lot of conflict, depending on which set of emperors and popes you look at. Regardless, once you have that piece of Augsburg, and now your empire is split in two, now it's definitely not holy, at least from a Catholic perspective. And it's definitely not wholly from a Protestant perspective either, because, the Catholics and the Protestants are having to, coexist within this one singular quote unquote empire.
The principle of cuius regio, eius religio, whose realm, whose religion, meaning all subjects must follow the faith of their ruler.
Yeah, that is what they landed on, right? That is the Peace of Augsburg Compromise. After years and years of religious warfare, they decide, okay, we've got like a million different little states here. Okay, so your particular prince or ruler or whomever can select the religion of his state, right? Wherever he goes, the people follow. That's how we're going to do things, right? So, you could imagine how that is a solution to what they've been dealing with. Now, it's not going to solve every problem. There are sort of obvious issues with that system, which is pretty clear because religious issues would persist after the treaty or the Peace of Augsburg, but it definitely is a solution.
But it is unworkable to impose belief from above.
Yeah.
Lutheran and Calvinist missionaries compete for converts. Many Catholics are ready to fight to reunify Christendom under the Pope. The Holy Roman Empire is a powder keg, primed to explode.
Yep. And now there is serious power behind both the Catholics and the Protestants. I mean, when you think back to Martin Luther in the early 16th century, when the Protestant Reformation begins, some of the early conflict to arise from that in 1524-25, I believe, are the German peasant revolts, when a bunch of peasants who have been inspired by a lot of this religious reform and revolt say, hey, you know what? Our lives suck. We're going to stand up against our local lords, and we're going to stand up against the church hierarchy. And all. There was different, depends on which particular revolt you look at, but basically they were standing up both religiously and against the social order of the era. Now, those peasant revolts were typically crushed by the powers of the era, which were majority Catholic. But we fast forward 100 years, and now, of course, you still have prominent Catholic powers, like the Habsburgs in Austria and Spain, the French, though the French might not do what you expect in this conflict. But, of course, you've got prominent Protestant powers as well. You've got the Dutch, who have been, fighting that long war. You've got the Swedes up north. You've got a bunch of different princes within the Holy Roman Empire. And so it's not an entirely one-sided division or conflict anymore. I would rather rule over a desert than a country of heretics. Ferdinand, King of Bohemia. Yeah, and that's the lack of toleration that was pretty common to this era. I mean, really, the Peace of Augsburg, which was a sort of degree of toleration, that's what we'd call it, that was not agreed on because everyone decided, you know what, let's just be tolerant and appreciate everybody. No, that was a matter of necessity. They agreed on that so they could stop killing each other. And you could see here that a lot of these leaders, whether within the church or outside the church, really did not want to tolerate any type of what they saw as heresy within their kingdom.
The first sparks flare in Bohemia. The local nobility is religiously diverse and fiercely independent. Here, Bohemian Hussites broke with Rome a century before the Reformation.
And this is, we don't have time to talk about it now, but a really fascinating conflict, which in some ways is sort of a prologue to the Protestant Reformation. Now, of course, it might not be, the Protestant Reformation was definitely a bigger break than had been seen previously, unless you talk about the break between the Orthodox East and the Catholic West. But it's not like the Protestant Reformation was the only time there was a reform movement within the Catholic Church, and that's what the Reformation started as, though it didn't end up that way. You can find many examples of what the Church saw as heresy and what the heretics might have seen as reform, attempts to change policy or change the Church. The Hussites are a good example of that, and a pretty, it was 100 years prior, but a more recent example when the Protestant Reformation begins.
But Bohemia is under the direct rule of King Ferdinand, a Habsburg and hardline Catholic.
Uh-oh.
He cancels concessions, demolishes non-Catholic churches. These deliberate provocations anger Bohemia's nobles and reformers. In May 1618, they corner two of Ferdinand's ministers at Prague Castle, subject them
And what do you think they do with them? Let's find out.
to a summary trial, and throw them and their secretary from a high window.
We call this defenestration, which is chucking someone out a window. And I will note, there were multiple defenestrations in Prague. This is not the only one. So it was sort of a tradition in Prague. When you had someone who you didn't like, you'd just chuck them out a window. I mean, legitimately, it happened more than once.
The two ministers survive the fall.
They did. Lucky.
Catholic allies claim angels saved them. Protestant rebels say they landed in a dung heap. One thing is not in doubt. Bohemia is in open rebellion against imperial Catholic rule.
I like the two different perspectives there, right? The Catholics say, well, the angels saved them as they were thrown from the window. The Protestants say they landed in a pile of shit. I think what might have actually happened, I don't know if this is an accurate depiction of the window they were tossed out of. I think perhaps there might have been, say, a sloped roof that they just slid down instead of falling all the way. Or maybe they just fell far away and survived anyway. I doubt either of these versions are particularly true, though I definitely don't think that, angels ferried them down to the floor.
The first act of violence in what will soon become the deadliest conflict Europe has ever known.
Yeah, until World War I.
Ferdinand has powerful allies. Duke Maximilian of Bavaria, leader of the Empire's Catholic League. The Duke of Saxony, a Lutheran but whose loyalty has been secured with promises of land.
John George, who, by the way, his nickname was Beer George. I mean, one of the great nicknames of all time. Doesn't take a genius to work out why. This man was a drinker, and he loved his beer in particular. So we've got Beer George, who was quite a character, as you could imagine.
And the might of Habsburg Spain, Europe's greatest power, unwilling to let upheaval in Germany threaten its supply road to the Netherlands.
Yeah, right. So keep in mind the era that we're in right now, right? 1618, the war is beginning. Let's think about our European balance of power. Spain, at the moment, is the greatest of European powers, right? Them and Portugal were the first to the Americas. In fact, they split the world in half with the Treaty of Tordesillas. And so Spain controls this massive territory, these colonies in the Americas. They're shipping back massive amounts of silver. So Spain has become fabulously rich, and with that, politically powerful, and of course, militarily powerful, right? Now, of course, through the 1600s, through this century into the next, you will see powers like France and England in particular begin to sort of rise up the chain. They will become more and more powerful until by the end of the next century, they will be far greater powers than Spain. But in this moment, Spain really is still the top dog. Spain is, of course, somewhat separated from the Holy Roman Empire, but there's a lot of connection there, right? With the Netherlands, who they've been fighting to keep control of. Of course, the Habsburgs, same family, rules over a lot of these territories. So Spain is quite connected to what's going on here.
But this imperial faction immediately faces serious threats. The Bohemian rebels besiege Vienna, while a Transylvanian force, supported by the emperor's bitterest enemy, the Ottoman Empire, invades Hungary, torching villages, seizing food, laying waste to the land. The Ottomans hold back from committing their own troops to the invasion force. It's a potent what-if moment from European history.
Yeah.
And exactly the sort of alternate history you can explore in Europa Universalis 5. Could you take advantage?
Like I said, I've got their video linked down below. I gotta say, I have never wondered what if the Ottomans got majorly involved in this conflict. I can't believe I've never thought of that, potential, but That could have really changed things,
In
considering how powerful the Ottomans were at that time. I mean, you could imagine them really making a difference. I mean, how would things have changed? I don't know, but still, that could have been pretty fascinating.
August 1619, emboldened by success on the battlefield, the Bohemians depose Ferdinand and replace him with one of their own, and crown him King Frederick. But in a plot twist, the Holy Roman Emperor dies, and Ferdinand is himself elected the new emperor that same month.
Yep.
The Bohemians' local revolt is now an act of treason against imperial authority.
Yeah, the Bohemians are now in big, big trouble, right? What started as a local dispute, right? And that's what it was, this local religious dispute, has now been blown up to the level of the entire Holy Roman Empire. Now, was this inevitable? Would this always have expanded? Maybe so, right? It's very possible. But with this, it is certain to expand beyond what it is in this moment. Now, is it certain to expand into a 30 years long, extraordinarily deadly conflict? I don't think it was inevitable at this point, but of course, that is what happened.
The tide begins to turn. Ferdinand enlists the help of Catholic Poland, which sends cavalry forces to harass the Transylvanians. They are driven back into Hungary. In November 1620, an elite Imperial and Catholic League force meets the ill-disciplined rebel army at White Mountain outside Prague. The fighting is brief but bloody. In just over an hour, 1,000 Protestant soldiers are slaughtered.
Sheesh. And what we see in the early stages of the war, now that it has become this war, right, and not just a local rebellion, essentially, what we see is that these Protestant rebels initially are really not prepared to deal with this pretty uniform Catholic League, right? They've got a lot of power. They're much more ready to fight a conflict like this. Now, the 30 Years' War is a war that's going to go back and forth and back and forth, so we'll see ups and downs for each side, but in the beginning here, I imagine if you were an observer of the conflict, once you get to this point, you think, yeah, the Catholic League is going to crush this, and this is all going to be over pretty quickly. Now, you'd be wrong, but I think that's probably what you might guess.
The fledgling Bohemian independence movement appears to have been crushed.
Yeah, seems like it's over. I mean, there's still high tensions, maybe things continue, but the center of this conflict has been dealt with. Surely now we're done. Now, as we know, we are not done.
But the wider conflict is far from over.
Yeah.
And soon, the flames of religious war will spread across the continent.
Uh-oh. We shall not rest until the princes and estates of the Holy Roman Empire, of both one and the other religion, shall live together in abiding peace. Okay, interesting. Christian IV of Denmark, letter to the Catholic princes in 1626. So, I mean, we can see sort of a different perspective coming there from Christian of Denmark, which shows you that, of course, there was a variety of different opinions among the rulers of the era. I mentioned with the Peace of Augsburg that it was only really agreed to because it was a necessity, and that is true, but of course, you could find some rulers, any type of toleration really was not common, but you could find some who understood and believed that, some degree of coexistence was necessary. And by the way, when we talk about coexistence or toleration here in the early 17th century, or especially in the 16th century, we're not talking about like modern religious toleration that we have, was a founding principle, say, in the United States and a lot of other countries today, where we all get to have our own religion that shall not be infringed upon by the government, etc., etc., etc. No, we are mainly just talking about being able to live as, for example, a Protestant in a Catholic territory, or vice versa, or even just allowing different states to choose their own religions, as we saw with the Peace of Augsburg, right? I mean, that is the type of toleration we're talking about. It's a pretty limited form of toleration.
After his victory at White Mountain, the uncompromising Emperor Ferdinand clamps down.
And you know what? I'm sort of understanding why they put that quote there from Christian, which is Ferdinand, as they pointed out, was very uncompromising, right? And that's one of the things that I think shapes this conflict from the beginning. He was uncompromising, a very uncompromising Catholic ruler, right? And there were a lot of people like that, but as we saw, there were rulers who were not like that, right? And so Ferdinand, how he deals with this, definitely affects how the conflict goes.
Rebel ringleaders are arrested and executed. Severed heads are put on public display. In 1621, the Emperor's avenging forces descend on the Palatinate, the homelands of Bohemia's usurper king. That same year, a truce between Spain and the Dutch expires, and open conflict reignites.
God damn.
It will soon blend into the wider European war between Catholics and Protestants. With Spanish help, Ferdinand's forces spend 3 years crushing all resistance. By the end of 1623, most of Western Germany is under Catholic League occupation.
And, you know, it's with this that you could maybe imagine if Ferdinand took a different path, if he hadn't gone full scorched earth on everybody, that maybe this war could have been contained a little bit. Not entirely, but maybe a bit. But with the action he takes, it's almost certain that it's going to escalate even further. And it is really crazy what an era of war we see here. With the 30 Years' War and the Holy Roman Empire, the Dutch get dragged into it. Of course, this is separate, but, you know, in only a few decades, England will be embroiled in a civil war of their own, right? So, really a time of great chaos on the European continent and beyond.
The mostly Protestant lords of northern Germany are alarmed by Catholic armies so close to their borders.
Yeah.
In 1625, Christian, King of Denmark and Duke of German Holstein, declares war on Ferdinand and marches south, a preemptive strike to secure his hold over North Germany.
Yeah, and once again, it's hard to set up counterfactuals, right? Who knows how things could have gone differently. I've seen the argument made that, you know, maybe Ferdinand was a little less zealous, then maybe these Protestant leaders of the North would not have felt so threatened and would not have taken this action. You can decide whether to believe that or not. I think it's definitely possible, right? Like I was saying, I do think Ferdinand's actions escalate the situation here. And of course, the perspective, it depends on which Protestant leader you're looking at. But as we saw Christian IV here, the perspective, you know, they're not... I mean, look, there were certainly some zealots and radicals, but a lot of these Protestant leaders are not fighting to dominate the Holy Roman Empire. They know that's not a reality. They're fighting, as Christian put it, just for coexistence between peoples of the two religions, right? And that's the only way they can secure a place for themselves within Central Europe.
Catholic League forces march north to confront the Danes and their allies. They are led by two brilliant commanders, Johann Tserclaes, Count of Tilly in the Spanish Netherlands, and Albrecht von Wallenstein, leader of Ferdinand's imperial army in Bohemia. Wallenstein is a Bohemian Protestant, but also a notoriously ambitious mercenary commander.
Yeah, Tilly and Wallenstein, two of the best-known names of this conflict.
Both men are heroes of the victory at White Mountain. For 3 years, the Catholic forces push the Danes out of Germany, while Wallenstein occupies the Baltic coast. The Danish king has no hope of victory.
Yeah.
In 1629, he surrenders to the Catholics.
So, I mean, we see here, the Catholics are really dominating this conflict, right? Not only within the Holy Roman Empire, but even beyond, up in Denmark, right? The Protestants, is really not going well for them. As I talked about, the Catholics in the beginning really present a more unified and powerful front than the Protestants do. Now, once again, we know there's many more years of this war, but if you were looking at it in this moment as well as an observer, you'd probably still say, okay, well, now it looks like it's over. The Catholics have won the whole thing. I mean, there is still fighting going on, so you probably wouldn't think it was entirely over, but you'd probably be pretty convinced of the dominance of the Catholic League at this point.
That same year, Ferdinand doubles down on Catholic supremacy by publishing the Edict of Restitution, a document that rolls back the spread of Protestantism since 1555.
Surely that won't be inflammatory?
It is an inflammatory move, utterly unacceptable to Protestants. Even loyal Catholics are dismayed.
Yeah. And so, once again, not to hammer home the same point, but this is where the particular zealotry of Ferdinand makes things turn in a particular direction versus what another Catholic ruler might have done, right? You could imagine another ruler who is still Catholic taking a different approach here.
The powerful princes who elect and support the emperor are known as the imperial electors. In 1630, they gather at Regensburg. They dismiss Wallenstein and reduce the army's size, hoping to de-escalate the conflict and contain Ferdinand's destructive instincts.
Yeah, so now the electors of the empire, in many ways against their own emperor, are like, okay, we gotta tamp this down. It's getting out of hand, Ferdinand.
But their measures go too far, leaving northern Germany virtually undefended.
Okay, now we're ready for a new entrant into the war.
Timing could not be worse. A violent storm is brewing in the north, and soon it will descend to wreak a terrible, destructive path through their precious empire.
These Scandinavians. I don't want to hear about neutrality. This is a fight between God and the devil, says Gustavus Adolphus, another of the most famous and well-known names of this conflict. And here we see, as opposed to the more, you could say, practical perspectives we've seen from some, once again, a perspective which, you know, is a little closer towards zealotry, or you could say just full religious faith, where no, this is not about neutrality. This is a fight between God and the devil. That's how a lot of Protestants saw it. From the other side, that's how a lot of Catholics saw it.
King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden is a militant Lutheran who fears a Habsburg presence on the Baltic Sea. He sails south to Pomerania in July.
So, I mean, you can see he's got both, obviously, religious motivations, as was highlighted in that quote, but very clearly material and political motivations as well, right? He wants to essentially protect the interests of his kingdom, right? And once again, we got to recognize that, yes, this war was religiously motivated, but that's not the only part of it.
He swiftly brings several North German states to his side, mostly under threat of force, and his numbers swell to almost 40,000. But one place allies with him willingly, the Protestant city of Magdeburg. The response of the Catholic and imperial forces, now all commanded by the Count of Tilly, is terrible. In May 1631, Tilly storms Magdeburg. Then, according to the city's mayor, the city was given over to murder, burning, plundering, torture, and beatings. Thousands of innocent men, women, and children were murdered and slaughtered in all sorts of merciless and wretched ways. By 10 o'clock that night, the entire city, along with its beautiful town hall and all its churches, lay in ashes.
And this is really one of those moments that, you know, we remember today, and also was very impactful at that time, right? Impactful to the people who were living and fighting in this war. And would definitely make an impression, as you could imagine, on everybody.
Over 20,000 are massacred.
Jesus.
Almost the entire population. The senseless slaughter is powerful propaganda for the Protestant cause.
Exactly.
Pamphlets and illustrated letters circulate, detailing the horrors and fueling a cycle of violent reprisal.
This is an era of the printing press. In fact, that's a big reason why the Protestant Reformation picks up the way it did 100 years ago, was the popularization of the printing press. That's, of course, only continued into the 17th century. There's lots of publishing happening, and so when you have an event like this, not only do people hear about it in a way they might not have previously, quicker and in more detail, but it can be used as a piece of political propaganda. And look, it's if you're a Protestant, it's not hard to make this into a piece of political propaganda. Really, all you have to do is just point out what happened. Look at this brutal sack of this city. Convinced?
Many Catholics will face a revenge called Magdeburg Mercy.
Yeah.
The unluckiest of them are forced to sample the infamous Schwedentrunk, the Swedish drink. Victims have their mouths pried open and their stomachs filled with water, filth, and excrement, up to the point of bursting.
Yeah.
Sweden's intervention unleashes the kaleidoscopic horrors of the 30 Years' War.
Yeah, I mean, look, things haven't been pretty up until this point, but Magdeburg, Sweden's intervention, I mean, this is when things really start to escalate in a big way, and this violence and destruction that this war is famous for really comes into play. There's armies of soldiers marching back and forth through the German countryside and just devastating villages and cities over and over and over again as people grow increasingly desperate. War feeds itself. Cato. True.
17th century armies sweep like locusts across Europe. Most are...
Locust is a great comparison, not just in the more literal sense, but in drawing the sort of biblical comparison. I think that people really did feel like a swarm of locusts had descended upon Europe. That's how a lot of the civilians, the peasants, felt. Like I said at the beginning of the video, a lot of people sort of felt like they really were entering the end times. I mean, that is how desperate this became for them.
Mercenaries paid in the plunder they seize from conquered lands.
Yeah.
They strip entire regions bare before they move on. Most of these armies are ordered in the Spanish system.
And before we get to that, I'll just point out in terms of the looting, right? I mean, when any army marches through an area, especially repeatedly, it's not going to be nice. But there are degrees, right? If you have a well-disciplined, professionalized, what we might call modern army, it can be a little better, although modern armies have committed plenty of atrocities throughout the years, so I don't want to downplay that. But particularly when you have a force like this, where a lot of these soldiers, a lot of whom are mercenary types, are relying on looting to get paid, that's going to make them increasingly brutal to these communities that they pass through. Because, well, they want to get paid, they want to make their money, that's why they're here. Especially as the war continues and some of the religious motives fall away. And so when these guys pass through towns, they will loot just about every household they can find. And they will take really anything of value, and out of a sort of base sense of cruelty and revenge, not based, base, they will torture and kill a lot of the people they find in these communities.
Most of these armies are ordered in the Spanish system. It is based around the tercio, a large square formation composed of pikemen and musketeers. They are supplemented by cavalry, used for scouting, harassment, or well-timed charges, and regiments of artillery. Together, muskets can be devastating, but individually they are inaccurate and slow to reload.
Yeah.
Musketeers are also vulnerable to fast-moving cavalry and require robust formations of pikemen to defend them.
Yeah, I'll say two things about this. One, there's this idea that some people have today that, wow, they were so stupid. People just like stood in a line and shot at each other. What the hell? Yeah, well, when you're dealing with weapons like these, you can only inflict damage on the opposing army if everyone stands in a line with their gun and shoots. These muskets are not incredibly accurate, and they are slow to load. And so, throughout this and the next century and beyond, you see the improvement of these armies are being able to shoot and reload faster, to perform maneuvers faster, right? In order to basically just shoot in a line at the enemy faster. And also, I think there's also this idea that, yeah, well, when guns arrived, everything changed. And that's true. I guess I'm sort of mocking that idea. It's true. Yeah, guns made things very different. But as you can see here, it's not like when guns arrived, cavalry and pikemen and more traditional types of soldiers became instantly outmoded. They were still necessary at this time. Now, as the years continue, slowly, things like cavalry will become less effective, but that's going to take a long, long time from here. Right? We're talking hundreds of years from this point onwards, right? So, just to point out, I feel like people, not to say I'm any expert on, late medieval and early modern firearms, but I just feel like people sometimes mischaracterize what role guns actually played, firearms, and don't quite understand how they were actually used at this time.
The Spanish system has dominated for a century, but recently things have begun to change. New Dutch-style infantry formations, called battalions, are smaller and less deep, with a larger proportion of firearms.
And there's that line I was talking about, line formation.
This makes them less durable, but also more flexible, mobile, and capable of firing denser, more deadly volleys.
Exactly.
And there is a push to integrate artillery with the rest of the army. Gustavus Adolphus is an early adopter and perfects the new system.
Yeah, I mean, Gustavus Adolphus, and we see this with a lot of great military leaders of history. He, of course, was greatly skilled and competent in battle, but he was also an early adopter of new ideas, right? A lot of these great military leaders either come up with these new ideas themselves, or more often, they're early adopters, right? Napoleon is another great example of that, right? He didn't necessarily create all the Napoleonic tactics he used, but he was an early adopter of this new modern military theory, right? So sort of a comparable example there.
His aggressive and innovative tactics, with smaller units, more firearms, and light artillery integrated into every regiment, make his army dazzlingly quick, mobile, and lethal for its size. They also win him a reputation as the father of modern warfare, and praise from men like Karl von Clausewitz and Napoleon Bonaparte as one of the greatest military commanders of all time.
Clausewitz, an extremely influential military theorist, and Napoleon, who I just mentioned of my own volition. Of course, he always has to come up.
In the summer of 1631, he seems unstoppable.
Right, seems. Until the Snow King will go on melting as he comes south. That's from Ferdinand. Okay.
In September 1631, the Swedish army of Gustavus Adolphus, bolstered by troops from Saxony, meets Count Tilly near a village called Breitenfeld. With nearly 40,000 on both sides, it is one of the largest battles of the 30 Years' War, and a clash between two of its most celebrated commanders. Tilly's cavalry charges the Swedish right. They are met with devastating fire, and are repulsed 8 times.
Wow.
At the other end of the line, Catholic cavalry routs the Saxons on Gustavus's left flank. But as Catholic forces advance, a gap opens up between them, which Gustavus exploits with a devastating counterattack.
Brilliant. And to do that, you need to be disciplined, fast-moving, and decisive, and that's what he was.
Tilly is caught flat-footed. His ranks dissolve and flee, leaving at least 7,000 dead on the field. with almost as many taken prisoner.
Sheesh.
The Swede and Saxon dead numbered just over 2,000. Breitenfeld is a crushing victory for Gustavus, and Tilly's first major defeat, a turning point that opens a pathway for the Swedes into the south. At Rhein, Tilly tries to stop them, but fails, and the old Catholic general is mortally wounded.
Yeah, this is a time when, and no offense to any Swedes out there watching, but, you don't think of the Swedes today as a very terrifying presence, but this is a time when this army of Swedes, and I mean, it was a multinational force, so that there's different groups in there, but this Swedish army marching through Germany, basically, was an absolute destructive menace.
Emperor Ferdinand turns to an old ally, Wallenstein.
Yeah.
In July 1632, Gustavus has moved north again, to Nuremberg. Wallenstein sets up camp nearby. Both sides struggle to find food, and are ravaged by starvation and disease.
Yeah, there's not a lot of food left at this point, and we've still got years to go in this war, right? But already it's hard to loot these places that have been looted a bunch of different times, and disease is beginning to set in, both within these armies and, of course, within the civilian populations.
Wallenstein breaks camp to scour Saxony for supplies. Gustavus follows and offers battle near the town of Lützen. He needs a quick victory before Wallenstein can be reinforced. But a thick fog spoils his plan. In the chaos, Gustavus leads a cavalry charge, loses his way in the fog, and is killed.
There he goes. Sometimes it happens that quickly, and things can really change in a moment.
On paper, Lützen is another Swedish victory, but the king's death is a grievous blow.
Yeah.
The Protestant cause reels from the loss of the Lion of the North, one of history's great military innovators and leaders.
Yeah, I mean, Gustavus Adolphus was really the one pushing this conflict forward, from the Protestant side at least. With him gone, they have lost their most impressive leader, and as they pointed out, truly one of history's great military leaders and innovators. They named him the father of modern European warfare, which I don't think is unfounded, though of course there's always debate about these types of things. What is undebatable is the impact he did have on European warfare following his life, right? The changes that took place in his image, right? And he was someone who, like they mentioned with Clausewitz and with Napoleon, was deeply admired, and people took notes from him following his death.
If Gustavus Adolphus had walked away from Lützen, history may have been very different.
Yeah, another potential turning point.
And such mishaps and accidents are sometimes argued to be as important to history.
This is a very interesting strategy here. Instead of one big long ad, you sort of splice it throughout the video. Interesting.
As its great structural forces, like culture and demography. Europa Universalis 5 is a game in which you can reach for many levers to influence the destiny of your chosen nation-state. But the unexpected can still throw you off course, just as it did for the Kingdom of Sweden. In this sophisticated sandbox for creating alternate history, the test will be to see if you can weather such storms and push on to empire and lasting glory. That winter, Swedish troops are mutinous and desperate. But Wallenstein holds back his forces in the east, near his own estates. In January 1634, Emperor Ferdinand learns Wallenstein has been negotiating his own separate peace. He is declared a traitor, cornered by imperial officers at his headquarters, and he too is killed.
Jesus.
It's the end of an era. 3 giants are dead. Tilly, Gustavus, and now Wallenstein.
Yeah, and there's a lot look, this is only a 30-minute video for a 30 years war, right? So there's a lot we are not covering in this series, particularly about the three silhouettes in front of us, Tilly, Gustavus Adolphus, and Wallenstein. We spent the most time talking about Gustavus Adolphus's impact, but someone like Wallenstein was a very influential, impressive figure, who was certainly a monumental figure of the era. And you can see that in the fact that he was negotiating behind the scenes, right? He had his own motivations at play, but there's only so much we can talk about in the time that we have here.
The Emperor turns his attention to the Swedish scourge. 33,000 imperial troops move into Bavaria. 26,000 Swedes meet them in pitched battle at Nördlingen. Without their totemic leader, the Swedes stumble to disaster.
Yeah.
They lose half their army, a potentially fatal blow. But it draws a new player into the fight. France.
The interest of a state and the interest of religion are two entirely different things from Richelieu. Richelieu, another political giant of this era. Now, that quote might sort of give it away. You'd think France, the Catholic power, coming into this war, would side with the other Catholic powers, the Catholic League. But, as I've been hinting at throughout the video, this war, though religion was a big motivator and was the pretext for the conflict, it's absolutely not the only thing at play, and France realizes that.
(1635). War has raged for 17 years.
Jesus.
Hundreds of German villages lie in ruins. Food shortages are chronic. Reports of cannibalism flourish. Besieged soldiers eating dead comrades. Women devouring their own children.
17 years. It's this devastating. By the way, only about halfway through. Jesus Christ. I'll say, I'm not like an expert on this conflict, right? But what I do know is there are sources of people who traveled through Central Europe at this time, whether as soldiers or something else, and they wrote down their accounts at the time or after the fact, and these accounts, you can read them, are truly harrowing. Maybe watch yourself if you don't want to hear about that, but really some truly disturbing stuff that these people write about, that they saw going through these German territories, that they went through communities that were basically entirely destroyed. All the crops had been looted or destroyed or ravaged, nothing to eat. People were incredibly sick. People would travel through communities and see the peasants lying sort of shriveled up on the side of the road, trying to eat like dirt or grass or whatever they could get their hands on, desperately sick and starving. Probably most of their family members already killed, right? That is the type of devastation we're talking about with this conflict.
Years of pillaging, banditry, and warfare have forced people everywhere into desperation and despair. The anti-imperial forces are in disarray. Emperor Ferdinand offers a way out. He swears to halt his assault on Protestantism. A general amnesty is proclaimed. Alliances with foreign powers forbidden. Protestant princes flock to accept the terms.
It feels like this could have been the deal, about 17 years ago, but whatever.
But the war does not end. A powerful new player will see to that.
Right.
Though Catholic, France is encircled by Habsburg domains. A grave strategic threat.
Right, and though I've been saying, it's not just about religion, okay, so why does France get involved on maybe the opposite side you'd imagine, given that they're Catholic? Well, as they pointed out, France is entirely surrounded by the Habsburgs, right? And as we mentioned earlier, this is a time when I'd argue England or Britain and France are they're on the rise throughout this and the following century against the more established powers of Europe, the Habsburgs being the most prominent of those established powers. And so France's, political interests are really trying to protect themselves from the Habsburgs and also knock the Habsburgs down a peg, right? That's what they need to do, or at least that's how they see it. And so when they get involved in this conflict, they're not going to get involved on the side of the Habsburgs. They're, Catholic allies under Christ. No, no, no. They're going to get involved with the heretical Protestants, as the Catholics would have seen it.
Cardinal Richelieu, France's ruthlessly pragmatic chief minister, has bankrolled anti-Habsburg forces for years.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about realpolitik, Richelieu is one of the best examples of that throughout history. A true scheming statesman.
He now commits to open conflict and declares war on Spain. But Richelieu immediately faces a crisis.
Oh.
The Rhine Valley is secured by France's German allies, but Spanish forces push into France from the north and east. They get within 70 miles of Paris before they are repelled. Meanwhile, the Swedish army is in a dismal state, unpaid, badly supplied, and mutinous. But French money and fresh reinforcements allow them to fight on. And then, another bolt out of the blue. In February 1637, Ferdinand II, the man whose intransigence threw Europe into war, dies aged 58.
I mean, this motherfucker, he in many ways started this war. I know there were other factors at play, obviously, but like I said, his intransigence started, or at least expanded and escalated this conflict, and he just dies midway through. I mean, that's not his fault, but yeah, it's kind of crazy to see Ferdinand, who's so central to this whole thing, is now gone.
His son and successor, Ferdinand III, is capable, level-headed, and more flexible. But he lacks his father's ruthlessness and is caught off guard by renewed Swedish energy.
Right.
Johan Barner, the aggressive Swedish commander-in-chief, conducts a series of audacious campaigns and wins upset victories at Wittstock and Chemnitz.
Hey, Swedes aren't done yet. You know what? I feel like the general impression of the Swedish participation is that after Gustavus Adolphus dies, they're sort of done. But we can see here that was obviously not the case. After they've had a bit of time to recover, lick their wounds, and get some of that French funding in, they're back at it. And I'll note, in terms of France, I think France's biggest influence on this war was definitely more political and monetary, right? France's money played a big part in this conflict.
But his supply lines cannot support a sustained advance, and each time he is forced to withdraw. Then he, too, dies of illness.
Damn!
In May 1641.
Okay.
The following year, his successors once again meet the Imperials at Breitenfeld and win another crushing victory.
Okay, wow.
The Swedes entrench themselves in Saxony, near the Habsburg heartlands. 1643 will prove a pivotal year. In May, 21-year-old Louis de Bourbon, Duke of Enghien, smashes a Spanish army at Rocroi. It is one of France's greatest military victories and secures its northern border from the Spanish threat. The French then move into southern Germany, but
so, now the France are really getting into it, with only a few years left to go in the war.
Advance grinds to a halt at Tuttlingen.
I mean, not that they knew that, right? But we do.
The efforts of the steely Bavarian commander Franz von Mercy. That same autumn, France's uneasy alliance with the Swedes faces crisis as the Swedish army marches north to invade Denmark. It is an opportunistic land grab by the government in Stockholm, spurred on by a more hopeful development. Peace talks have begun in the Westphalian towns of Osnabrück and Münster. Everyone wants peace, but all seek a strong bargaining position.
And this really characterizes these last few years of the 30 Years' War, which is, at this time, people are truly exhausted by this conflict. I mean, even those who were more zealous earlier in the war, I mean, Ferdinand's dead, but basically almost everybody is like, okay, this has got to end, right? This has totally been out of control. But the problem is, everyone, as they said, is looking for a strong foot to end in. They want to gain a strong position so that when they negotiate peace, they can come out on top, right? So it's like everyone's like, no, this has got to end. We're ready to negotiate as long as we're doing well at the moment, right? And that characterizes the last few years of the war.
Ensuring talks and the war will drag on for 5 more years. Southwestern Germany is ripped apart by clashing armies, until Mercy is killed at Allerheim, along with 9,000 other casualties.
Jesus.
The road to Bavaria lies open, but the French can't take full advantage. Victory has crippled their army.
There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare from Sun Tzu. My God, we're whipping out the Sun Tzu right now. Goodness.
1645. The Swedes have returned to Saxony. Pushing south, they almost reach Vienna. But with too few men to take the city, they swing north to loot Moravia and fall back. By 1646, the French have regathered their strength and march against Bavaria. A Swedish force joins them and maneuvers past Emperor Ferdinand's main army, leaving Bavaria virtually undefended. To save his duchy, Bavaria's Duke Maximilian, one of the few leaders in place since 1618, offers peace, only to rejoin the war a few months later. The French and Swedes have had enough and decide on a joint decisive blow.
Okay.
In May 1648, the last Imperial field army is shattered at Zumarshausen. The remnants fall back into the far south, leaving Bavaria's countryside exposed to plunder, pillaging, and wanton violence.
I know at this point there's nothing to be shocked by, right? It's been almost 30 years of this, but I mean, that is what is so crazy about this, that we are about 30 years in. I mean, it ends at 30 years, but we're almost there, and there is still more looting and death and battles, right? There's still more violence that we're seeing here. I mean, and that is why this is such a destructive war, because the battles that were fought involved a lot of people, had really high death rates, and there were just a lot of them, right? As we've seen here, this war lasted for this 30 years, right? And, the fighting wasn't constant, as in it wasn't literally every single day, but it was pretty consistent throughout all those years. We've seen there's been a bunch of different campaigns throughout this war. I mean, that's what made it so destructive.
While the remains of the Bavarian and Imperial armies hold up a desperate defense, a separate Swedish force marches south from Saxony and reaches Prague. In a twist of fate, they capture Jaroslav Borgita, one of the men thrown from the castle window 30 years before.
Wow.
But the Swedes...
That is crazy as well. 30 years before. I mean, that is insane. I mean, you just got to contextualize it a little bit. Imagine this war starts, and you are a 30-year-old man in the prime of your life. By the time this war ends, you will be 60. It's not, you can be older than that. That's not the point I'm making. But still, you've gone through a massive chunk of your life at that point, right? 30 entire years, that's crazy.
Can't take the city. Both sides are exhausted, down to their last reserves of stores and energy.
And I mean, this is, I know I'm really harping on how long the war was, but this is another reason why when you look at the people who lived through this, this is why, I mean, along with the constant death and destruction, they got so end timesy about it, is because this has been 30 years. For a lot of people, this has just been your entire life. Your entire life has been death, destruction, famine, and disease. If you live through 30 years of that, yeah, no shit, you're gonna think it's the end times. You're gonna think that the earth is about to swallow you whole. This is all you've ever known, right? You're living on hell on earth, and it's been your whole life.
Then, in early November, momentous news arrives. Peace. After 5 years of discussion in Westphalia, conditions have finally been set.
Alright, let's hear these revolutionary peace conditions. Was it all worth it, guys?
The terms: Dutch independence from Spain, along with that of Switzerland, one of few imperial realms that has managed to stay neutral in the war.
Classic.
Greater religious tolerance in Germany. There is to be no forced conversion of subjects, except in the lands under direct Habsburg rule. And territorial concessions to the major anti-Habsburg powers. France receives...
So just before we get into all of this, not to say that that's not a significant change, but really feels like we could have achieved this without 30 years of war. Now, once again, obviously history happens how it happens, right? If something different had happened, then we never would have landed on this result, obviously. But it's just one of those things you feel like, you feel like this, I feel like this with the First World War as well, where you go through this massive conflict, and frankly, there was no peace that could have justified all the death and destruction that just happened. But you're left with this treaty, and you're sort of like, dang, okay, that's what the past 30 years was for then, Anyway, that's just my sort of view of it. But of course, Westphalia is a significant moment in the history of modern Europe, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we go through these results.
To the major anti-Habsburg powers. France receives Alsace, while Sweden gains Western Pomerania. And
keep an eye on Alsace. That'll be important for the history of France and Germany.
3 important German ports. After 30 years of war, it is a peace everyone can live with.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what it took. Everyone needed to truly go through hell for 30 years to basically, re-agree kind of in what had been agreed at Augsburg. This is different, absolutely, but the idea of just coexistence, of some degree of toleration, that general idea, maybe everyone needed to go through this 30 years to be like, okay, we can't keep doing this. We cannot keep fighting each other like this. Maybe not, like I said, it'd be preferable if this could have been agreed to without all the warfare, but that is one of the results of this. They say the terrible war is now over, but it still doesn't feel like peace. Everywhere there is jealousy, hate, and worse things. The war has taught us such. Scribbled in Family Bible, Gerstetten, Germany, 1647. Right? Once again, people have lived through this their entire lives. This is going to shape you, your worldview, irrevocably.
The 30 Years' War was a disaster unprecedented in Europe's history. A local revolt over religious rights that reignited ancient rivalries and fed on personal ambitions until nearly all Europe found itself at war. An estimated 5 to 8 million died.
Think of that. 5 to 8 million in the 1600s, right? That is crazy. Once again, the most devastating war in terms of raw numbers until the First World War about 300 years later. And here they're going to go into the percentages, which are even more devastating.
Most from famine and disease. The hardest hit areas lost nearly 2/3 of their inhabitants.
I mean, that's a crazy long recovery time. It's like when you look at the population of Ireland following the famine, right? Sort of a similar deal, although, well, I'm not going to say which is more devastating. Don't have the numbers in front of me in terms of percentage of population. Anyway, that's not the point. Point is that you can see in these types of events how devastated the population is, that, it takes you a century or even more to recover.
1/5 of all Germans perished, a much larger share than in either World War.
Look at that. Look at that. That's crazy.
Even after the Peace of Westphalia, Spain and France fought on for 11 more years.
Sheesh.
The Holy Roman Empire, though weakened, survived for about another 150 years, finally dissolved in 1806 during the Napoleonic Wars.
Thank you, Napoleon. And I'll point out here, since I'm not sure we actually are going to cover it in the video, that the Treaty of Westphalia and this idea of sort of sovereignty that was reinforced, the idea, it was sort of established in Augsburg, but is reinforced here, that, okay, we won't be able to interfere or, govern territories that are not our own. Each of these states has their own sovereignty. They can deal with their own affairs religiously, and that expands into other areas. A lot of sort of legal scholars, if you're interested in modern geopolitics, see this in Augsburg in many ways as the basis of modern sovereignty, right, on an international scale. Where today we look around the world, we've got things like the UN today, but we look around the world, we see these different countries, we see each of these countries has sovereignty. They can sort of determine their own internal goings-on, unless it's sort of an exceptional circumstance. And, I mean, look, how much is sovereignty actually respected? It depends on the country. But regardless, we have this idea of sovereignty today that a lot of, like I said, scholars in many ways think it goes back to this era, and they really hold Westphalia up as important in that process.
The Treaty of Westphalia is
Are they about to say what I just said?
often viewed as a turning point in world history.
Yeah, I think they are.
The first modern secular international peace conference, and a major step toward the rise of Europe's nation-states.
Yeah. That's kind of what I said.
Historians continue to debate Westphalia's importance, but one thing is not in doubt. The 30 Years' War cast a long and terrible shadow. For 300 years, it remained a terrifying, cautionary tale of how one small act of violent resistance might spiral into a senselessly destructive total war.
Yeah.
A warning that was, ultimately, unheeded.
Yeah, and as I've been saying, most deadly war in terms of pure numbers until World War I, right? The 30 Years' War was this cautionary tale until we get to the early 20th century, and then we get some new cautionary tales, which hopefully will be heeded in the future and today, but I'm not so sure. Wow.
Thank you again to Europa Universalis for...
Once again, their video is linked down below, so go check it out. Thank you to Epic History for this fantastic video. A new extra history video is always extra epic history. Excuse me, I get them mixed up sometimes. Thank you to Epic History. A new epic history video is always quite the event. It's always fun. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a lot to fit in to that 30 minutes, and I do love to talk generally, but also about the 30 Years' War in particular. But yeah, certainly a lot to cover in that time we had. Of course, you know me, I could yap for hours and hours and hours, as I do sometimes. So thank you guys for watching. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. And it'll give you access to, at this point, years worth of exclusive content. So go check that out. Thank you everybody for watching. Hope you're having a great day today. And I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.